Well, good morning, New Union Baptist Church. I trust that all of you are recovering well from vacation. I know many of you guys have been out of pocket over the last couple of weeks with it being dead period and all. But I trust that you are well rested. It's really good to be with you guys this morning. So glad all of you are here. We are continuing our study on the Sermon on the Mount. We're finishing up Matthew chapter 6 today, in verses 25 through 34. Justin Smith brought the word last week, did a wonderful job, and this passage goes hand in hand with the one that he gave to us then. And there are a couple of verses that he touched on briefly, but I wanted to read them to you along with the rest of the ones that we're going to read this morning. And so we're gonna dip back into the passage that he taught in verse 22, and then I'll skip down to the one we're doing this morning. Matthew chapter 6, starting verse 22. The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will hold to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. For this reason I say to you, do not be anxious for your life as to what you shall eat or what you shall drink, nor for your body as to what you shall put on. Is not life more than food, and the body than clothing? Look at the birds of the air, that they do not sow, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not worth much more than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single cubit to his lifespan? And why are you anxious about clothing? Observe how the lilies of the field grow. They do not toil, nor do they spin. Yet I say to you that even Solomon, in all of his glory, did not clothe himself like one of these. But if God so raised the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, will he not much more do so for you, O men of little faith? Do not be anxious then, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or with what shall we clothe ourselves? For all these things the Gentiles eagerly seek, for your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. Therefore, do not be anxious for tomorrow will care for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Jesus, in the context here, he's talking about earthly reward versus heavenly, eternal reward. And in this chapter, he's dealt with fasting, he's dealt with prayer, he's dealt with many different issues, and this one is the same, that we need to have an eternal perspective. And Justin touched on that last week when talking about money, that we need to be open-handed with what God has given to us. And this passage here deals with that. And when you look at what it says about the eye, when you think about the eye is what helps you to perceive things in life. And if we have the proper perspective, if our eyes are filled with a good perspective, then it says there that it will be a lamp showing us the way. And we will be able, I don't know how many of you still have children in the house, and most of them like to play with Legos. Have you ever tried to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night? And it's like a minefield, right? And you need a light to see where those Legos are, or you'll be waking up the wife, right? And so your eyes, if they have a proper eternal perspective, it lights the way before you, and you are able to walk about safely in this life. You're able to walk about in peace. And today is another one of those areas where we have to have an eternal perspective on things. And it goes hand in hand with what Justin said last week. And after last week, you may have been saying, well, Keith, I hear what Justin was saying about being open-handed with our money, but you know we live on this earth, right? You guys know that I'm very fond of the movie It's a Wonderful Life. And in the movie, George Bailey gets into trouble, and he's on a bridge, and he's about to jump off the bridge to his demise. And an angel is sent to help him. What's the angel's name? Yeah, y'all are a fan of the classics. I love it, okay? And so Clarence is there, and he says, George, I've come to help you. And he says, well, you wouldn't have $10,000 on you, would you? And he goes, oh, no, we don't use money in heaven. That's not a thing. And he says, well, I forgot about that. But it sure does come in handy down here, bub, right? And that's the perspective that we here as believers on this earth have to have eternal perspective. But we live in a world where you have to have dollars and cents. You have to have things like food and covering and shelter and that sort of thing. Well, Jesus is going to give us about 10 verses on this. He gave you verses 19 through 24 about eternal perspectives, but he gives you about twice as much material as that about living this out in a world that is very contrary to the eternal. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you, I've read the passage to you, and I want to give you some points here on the passage. And you write these down, because this is going to hit not only the haves, the people who have a lot of money, but it's going to hit the have-nots too, as well. And all across that spectrum, we still have to have an eternal perspective about money. I've told our youth, and I tell our adults, it doesn't matter if you make $10 babysitting or if you make $1,000 a week, whatever the case may be. You've got to take a percentage, and you have to have an eternal perspective and give back to the God and the work that He is doing through this church out there in the world. You all understand? So we have to have an eternal perspective on this. Let me give you several points on this. You write these down. The first point, and it's very subtle. If you don't watch out, you can miss this one real easy. Jesus doesn't talk in verses 25 and following about seeking after wealth and seeking after luxury. He talks over and over about food and covering. The birds they have and what they eat, and the flowers and what they wear. And so your first point is that all that money can offer you is the sustaining of physical life. All that money can offer you is the sustaining of physical life. Essentially, money cannot deal with who you are as a person. It can affect your attitude, your demeanor maybe, but it cannot deal with who you are. But it helps you keep living. Ecclesiastes says this: all a man's labor is for his mouth. And that is all that money can do. All that it can do is provide food and clothing for you. If you have a Ford pickup truck instead of a Rolls Royce, it is still you driving it. If you have a 1,200 square foot house instead of a 12,000 square foot house, it's all well and good, but it's, regardless of which you are, it's still you cutting off the lights when you go to bed. You're still the one that's staying there in that house. Whether it's in Dayton or in the Highlands of North Carolina, right? It's still you. It doesn't change who you are. Whether you have fine clothes or whether you get your clothes from the free clothes giveaway every year down here in the gym. Whether it's new clothes or whether it's hand-me-downs, it's still you wearing them. And so money essentially cannot change who you are. It can't. Johnny Carson once said this: all that money can give you is the freedom from having to worry about not having money. And this is a guy that had it. This is a guy who knew how to accumulate it. He was wealthy. And what he said is true. It can't essentially, substantially change you. If you think back to the Garden of Eden, you look at man dwelling in the garden. He was not wired for wealth. Man is not wired for that initially, and not in the image of God even still. Man is wired in the garden. He is wired to know God. He is wired to obey God. He is wired to serve God and glorify God. Money and wealth will not satisfy you. You are wired for the eternal as a human being that is made in the image of God. If money and wealth could satisfy you, I want you to think about all through history. If money and wealth could satisfy you, who would be the happiest culture across all of history of the world? Who would it be? It would be America in the 20th and 21st centuries, because we have more trinkets, we have more gizmos than we've ever had before, we have more food, we have more covering than we ever have, and what do? We clamor for more land, we want more closet space for all of our clothes, we want more garage space so that we can store all of our junk. We struggle with not starvation, but we struggle with losing weight. And yet, has our culture arrived as far as happiness and meaning? It hasn't. It hasn't at all. And so if wealth could do it, post-1950 America, we would have arrived. But are we happy? No, we're not. And so the second point, and you'll notice it there in verse 25, and it kind of rolls off of the first point. Look there in verse 25. It says, don't be anxious. Verse 27, why be worried? Verse 28, why are you worried? Verse 31, don't worry. Verse 34, don't worry. I wonder what point he's trying to make here. Right? See, an English teacher would have counted off for being repetitive and being redundant. The writer just uses it too much over and over. Well, the idea here, and this is your second point, money is not to be your worry or your concern. Money is not to be your worry or your concern. It's not to be your preoccupation. It's not to be your priority. It's not to be your purpose. You are not to make it your everything, to go after excessive amounts of money that will only put covering and food on you. See, when you look at Adam and Eve, let's go back there again. When you look at them in the garden, that is where you see man pristine. You see him unfallen. That was Adam standing there. What was he made to do in the garden? He was meant to walk with God in the cool of the day. He knew who God was, and that is what we have been created to do, to know God. What else was Adam supposed to do and to be? He eats of the tree of life. He doesn't just know God, but he also obeys God. And then what does he do? He subdues the earth. He fills the earth. He multiplies. He cultivates the earth. All of that comes together with him and what he was created to do. He was created to serve God. And what does the Westminster Confession say? The chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. So that's what God wired us to be. We're to be theologians that know him, people of holiness. We are to be missionaries. We are to be servants of the High King. So if, according to the Garden of Eden, if this is how we have been rigged as human beings that have been made in the image of God, then why do we worry about the small stuff? Why do we do that? If you get your 3 square meals a day, if you have clothing, then you're okay. If you have more than others, that's okay. Use it. But don't think that your life will fail or succeed based upon all of the toys that you have. Man is not made to be a pack rat where you're just collecting more and more and more stuff. That's not what Adam did, and that's not what Christ did when he roamed on this earth. Well, your third point here. Jesus has already said, don't worry about the small stuff. What you'll eat, how you're clothed. He says that because at the end of verse 25, is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? And what Jesus is saying is that your life is not about processing food. It's not just about you making sure that you have enough to feed your face to stay living. God hasn't put you here to be a hat rack so we can put a hat and clothing on you and drape clothes on you. That's not what He created you to do. He didn't make Adam to do that, and He didn't make you to do it either. And it's like Jesus is telling us right here, you guys need to get a life. And so your third point is this. Life is more important than physical sustenance and continuity. There's more to it than you just going day to day, living your life, staying alive. If you know your history, back in the 1950s, you had a post-war generation where you saw inventions like rubber products, plastics, technology. And because of that, all of a sudden, you had suburbs, you had wealth, you had cars, you had televisions. You had all of these technologies coming out, and that was in the 1950s. And in the 1960s, what people did is they rebelled against that personal peace and that affluency. The folks of the 60s had a rebellion against it because they felt that life was more than just having all of this stuff about you. And the problem with it all was that in the 60s, they knew what life was not. It wasn't about this non-compassionate use of accumulated wealth. They knew it wasn't about that, but they didn't know what to do in its place. And that was the problem. They knew what they didn't like, but they didn't know what they should be like. Well, Jesus Christ fixes that in this passage. He's given you the complete revolutionary picture here. Life is not just about the acquisition of wealth. It's not about sex, drugs, and rock and roll either, though. So what is it about? Seek first the kingdom of God. Now, I didn't wash too well with Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix, all right? They weren't down with that. But Jesus had that same revolutionary mindset of the people in the 60s. Travel light. So life is just more than them physically existing. It's more than that. And that brings us to our fourth point. That life should be simple. Life should be simple. What does Paul say in 1 Timothy 6? We shall be content if we have food and covering. With these we shall be content. And Jesus says, God feeds the birds and clothes the flowers. Men of little faith, God will take care of you. Live simply. Did y'all know there was a study that was done a while back, and the study was about the happiest people in America. Do you know who was far and above number one? The happiest people in America. It was the Amish. Why is that? Why? They're a bunch of people. You don't have any gadgets. I mean, how do you get along without a phone anymore, huh? They don't have any gadgets. They don't have cars. They don't have any debt problems. They go home from work with working with their hands to a quiet house. There's no televisions. There's no radios. It's quiet. And all that's there is their family. They have order. They have God. They have right. They have wrong. And they are adamant about how they do things and how they live. There is order and simplicity. And the Amish are, according to the studies, they're the happiest demographic in the United States. They don't have ulcers, because they're not in constant pursuit of a bunch of stuff like we are. Well, let me show you a text on the idea of simplicity. Keep your finger there in Matthew chapter 6 and turn over to Proverbs 27. Proverbs 27. I want you to see this instead of just quoting it, okay? Solomon is the richest guy on earth. He's the richest guy. And in Proverbs 27, starting in verse 23, he speaks to the lower class of Israel. Proverbs 27, starting in verse 23. says there, know well the condition of your flocks and pay attention to your herds. Now, who are we talking about here? Talking about a shepherd, right? These are the guys that in Egypt, Joseph told his brothers when they were coming, don't tell them you're shepherds. That's a lowly thing. They won't respect you if you do that. So don't tell them. I mean, this was a lowly position in Israel. And here, you've got the richest guy in all of Israel, and he's looking at the lower class man. And he says to those guys, these guys that are hand to mouth, he says, you do your job well. You do it as best you can. Know the condition of your flocks. Be a good shepherd. Enjoy being a shepherd. That's where God has placed you. Enjoy what you do. And in verse 24, he tells them, don't be looking at my wealth and where I live. Don't go driving by my neighborhood on Sunday afternoons wishing you lived there. Are you with me? That's Living Bible. Verse 24, look there. For riches are not forever, nor does a crown endure to all generations. And so Solomon looks at them and tells these guys that wealth and fame are not all that they're cracked up to be. Andrew Carnegie once said that $1 million is a burden that no man should have to bear. And y'all are sitting there going, give me that burden, right? But we don't know what it's like to have to manage that kind of money. Not all of us, maybe some. But it's a distraction. It keeps us from having our eyes on the eternal. And he says that it's a burden to have that much money. Henry Ford said, the happiest that I ever was in life was when I was a mechanic. Can you believe that? And Solomon says here, riches are not forever. The crown is not for all generations. You're going to lose it. All you minimum wage guys don't need to be discontented with minimum wage because all of this wealth and riches, Solomon says, they're not what they're cracked up to be. You don't know what it's like to be me. You don't understand. And he says in verse 25, you've got everything that you need. Verse 25, when the grass disappears, the new growth is seen, and the herbs of the mountains are gathered in. He says you've got grass for your animals. You can gather vegetables from the mountains. God provides for you. And in verse 26, you've got lambs for your clothing, and you've got a home. The goats will bring the price of a field. And in verse 27, you can have a family, and there will be goat's milk, enough for your food, the food of your household, and sustenance for your maidens. I can't tell you how many times I've met these guys that when they were in college, they would stay in this small apartment. Some of them married, right? And they'll pay $200 a month to be in this little apartment. They're working part-time at 84 Lumber, right? Just making a few bucks. And they got a wife, they got a kid, they got a swing set. They've got a sandbox. They got enough to go to the mall and eat out every couple of weeks and maybe window shop and look at all the things that they can't afford anyway. But what they do is they get caught up in the American way. And they got to have their own lumber store themselves, which is all well and good, but they have to get their own business and lots of money. And the mindset that they have is that it's going to give them meaning. And now they have this huge inventory that is dependent upon future building of houses. And then someone bombs somebody somewhere in the world and the stock market crashes and the capital isn't out there and people aren't going to build. And then you're stuck with all of this lumber, and your top employee went over and got his own lumber company and ends up taking a bunch of your clients away. And then workers' compensation goes up. And so pretty soon you can't go home at 5 o'clock anymore and watch the news. All of a sudden you're there till 8 p.m. You've got an ulcer this big, right? And your kids are not acting the way that they ought because you're not able to spend time with them. It's a scary notion right there. And you have a couple of Xanax that you keep in your pocket because the pressure becomes so great. And it's either that or martinis, but you don't want to drink. And you know what? That guy goes home and he sits in his recliner at night and he's just trying to chill. He's just trying to veg. And you know what thought comes to his mind? It's not, man, I wish I had more money. I wish I had more dough. That's not what crosses his mind. He thinks, man, I wish I could push my kid on the swing set like I used to. I wish I could sit on the edge of the sandbox and play with him like I used to. I wish we could just go on down to the food court at the mall, right? And just eat Chick-fil-A like we used to once every couple of weeks. Life was simple then. I wish I would have just left it to Mr. 84 Lumber and let him get the ulcers, because I want simple life again. And I could spend the rest of our time here telling you stories of people that I've met up with over time where this has happened in their lives, and I'm begging you not to let it happen to you. So live simply. Enjoy the simple things in life, right? We'll go back to Matthew chapter 6 with me. Matthew 6. You with me so far? Money can provide food and covering. And the second point was, don't be preoccupied by it. And the reason we aren't preoccupied with it is because of the third point, that life is more than physical continuity. And the fourth point is, live simply. And your fifth point, here's number 5, God will provide the basics. God will provide the basics. He takes care of the birds and the flowers, and if He takes care of them, He will take care of you as well. If you have food and covering, with these we shall be content, the passage that Dawson read to us says. With these things we shall be content. See, I'm looking out at all of you. I don't see anybody naked. Thank goodness. All right? That'd be embarrassing. And if you're like me, you ain't hurting in the food department, right? Gaining a few. We're all prospering pretty well if we take this point to heart. If you have food and covering, with these we shall be content. Incidentally, I heard a fellow say this at a funeral. He said, you can't take it with you. And he said, when Jesus died, what did He not take with Him? Did He take His clothing with Him? No. They shot dice for it. He didn't have His clothing. What about food? Water. One of the last things He said was, I thirst. I thirst. So what did He take with Him? He had a guy next to Him on the cross. Said, this guy has done nothing to deserve this. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. What did Jesus get to take with Him? Souls. Souls. And that's what you get to take with you when you have an eternal perspective and you don't allow materialism and money to rob you of the focus that is on the eternal. You share the gospel with people. I can tell you something. When you get to share Christ with somebody and you can't remember half of what you said because the Holy Spirit takes over, and you're just faithful to open your mouth and let the words come out, and you share Christ with people and you sit there and watch them pray to receive Christ, I can assure you that's when life gets interesting. That's when life is meaningful. Yet we try to surround ourselves with stuff to show other people that our life has meaning. But there's nothing greater than to be used by God to win souls to Him and take those with us when we go on. Well, God will provide the small stuff so that we can focus on the eternal. When I was in college, I earned $5.25 an hour working for A&P Food Store. Somehow I came out of college with only $14,000 in debt. And if you know how much school costs, that's nothing these days. I went to Texas, and I was a painter at $7.50 an hour. And I was able to start paying off my debts before I got married, right? And God took care of me, making $7.50 an hour in Texas. As newlyweds, I started in youth ministry, making $28,000 a year. Could you imagine, Dawson? Being $28,000 a year? How do people make it these days? Just starting out. You know? The way the housing market is, it's crazy out there. But I made $28 a year. Sarah made $17 a year as a school teacher. And we lived in this little 2-bedroom apartment. And God took care of us magnificently. We were week to week, month to month, but we paid off all our debt and we had plenty. And God has never, ever, I don't care what phase of life it is, I can tell you stories of Him giving to us when I wasn't even employed that would blow your mind. And He has never dropped the ball on me. Has He ever dropped the ball on you? Never. He will take care of you. He'll provide the basics and He'll take care of you. And you might say, well, Keith, you showed us pretty good the negative side of all this, but about what not to worry about, how to see money. But what do we seek? Verse 32. For all these things the Gentiles eagerly seek. See, a Christian who is always seeking stuff, they're always seeking money. Jesus says that you are no different from the rest of the world. That's what they do out there. But we can't do that in here. We have to have more of an eternal perspective. We are to be different. Verse 33. If you want a purpose, seek this. Do you want a priority? Then seek this first. Here's what the people of God are to desire more than anything. We want His kingdom. We want His righteousness. Well, what is His kingdom? It's that time where Christ returns. He comes through the clouds, and men weep over their sin when they see Him coming. And every knee will bow, every tongue will confess, and He will rule, and we will rule as believers. We will rule along with Him, and that is His kingdom. And we live looking forward to that day, and the currency in getting there is righteousness, and we live our lives in obedience to Christ while we get there. And that is what we live for. That is what we look forward to. That is having an eternal perspective. We live for that day. Seek first that kingdom. The currency is righteousness. Martha Stewart. Y'all know who she is? Everybody knows that woman, right? Especially you that like to have nice decorations in your house. I call it landfill fodder, all right? But a lot of you like those nice things in your house. So y'all know Martha Stewart. Do you remember when she got in trouble? Early 2000s? Do y'all remember that? She got inside knowledge about the stock market and then used that knowledge to make money off the stock market, which is illegal. And she ended up going to prison. You can't do that. But you are to be like Martha, in that Jesus has told us where the future is going. And like Martha, we are to trade on it. Do your work for the glory of God. And the money that you have, don't rest on it. You use it. Seek for souls. Seek for eternal things. That is what will set us apart as God's people. Let me show you a great cross-reference. It's the passage that Dalton read to us. There are two major texts in the New Testament on how wealth is to be handled by the church. One is in James 4, the other is in 1 Timothy 6. Let me take you there. And I don't want to just quote this to you. I want you to see it. I want you to study it. 1 Timothy 6. And we're going to look at the last paragraph starting in verse 17. Turn there. 1 Timothy 6. We'll move through this quickly. I know we're up against it. Y'all are okay with me dealing with this, right? It's not NFL, it's not football season yet, all right? Y'all got time. First Timothy 6, starting in verse 17. He says in verse 17, instruct those who are rich in this present world. And see, that's our understanding right there. Is your money going to last beyond this life? No, it's not. So the wealth that you will earn, you will only have for a few years. That's it. You can't pack it. There are no U-Hauls at funerals. You're going to leave it behind. And your kids, they're going to sell it cheaply at a garage sale. And then they'll take your house and they'll rent it out to a bunch of Brian students and they'll destroy it. So it's pretty much gone. Right? You can't take it with you. So I'm doing what Paul told the pastor Timothy to do. I'm instructing those who will be wealthy in this present world. That is all the time that you have it. It's just for a little while in the blip. It's a blip on the radar when it comes to eternity. And in verse 17, he gives a warning. Notice there are two things that your money can do. It says there, don't be conceited. Can money make you arrogant? It can. Don't let it do that. Don't let it do that. And secondly, don't fix your hope on its uncertainty. Can money lure you into a lifestyle that can give way on you? You bet. That's another thing I've seen a lot of over time, where people get to a point in their life where their business is making them a lot of money, and then they turn around and start spending that money like crazy, trying to show everybody in the world that they have meaning. And what ends up happening? The money shuts off, and then the bank owns them, and then they don't know what to do. It happens all the time. And money is a currency that can burn you like that. And in verse 17, fix your hope on God, who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. So it says here, let me encourage you, it says here to enjoy your money. He goes from a warning to an admonition. Enjoy it. Go get some Moose Tracks. Any Moose Tracks fans? All right. Yeah. Go get you some Moose Tracks. Go watch a good movie. Fellas, go buy a new gun. You have my permission, right? See, you want to make sure that your last check in this life bounces. I can show you far more theological preciseness on taking your family to the beach than I can on hoarding. Enjoy your money. You need to run out of money at the same time that you run out of your last breath. That's what I think here. And that's what I think I can make a biblical case for. And in verse 18, don't just enjoy it, but use your money. He gets serious again here. He says, do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. Give your money away. Find someone that needs it more than you. There's a lot of good that can come from money, so use it to help people. What if the church operated this way? Wouldn't this be a beautiful place where no one had want? It would be like the Israelites in the wilderness with the manna that God gave some more. God gave to some in excess, and to some He gave little. And when one family was done eating, they had a little left over, and this guy over here wasn't done yet, and they didn't have enough. So this guy took what he had and he gave it to this guy over here. And biblically, we can make a case that the church needs to be this way. And if you do, verse 19, you store up for yourselves treasure of a good foundation for the future. That's the kingdom of God it's talking about. Paul said to the Philippians that sent him money, I don't seek for the gift itself, but for the profit that increases to your account. Does God keep a ledger on what you give? According to this, He does. According to this, He does. It kind of sounds crass, but it's true. Store it up in heaven. Use it. And don't use it to make much of you. Use it to make much of God. Are you with me? Use it to glorify God. And in verse 19, that you will, and I'll end with this, you will take hold of that which is life indeed. Now, if you live life this way, you will have life and joy. Life gets fun when you take your money and you hold it loosely, as Justin said last week. The Bible says that he that sows sparingly shall reap sparingly, and he that sows abundantly shall reap abundantly. God will increase your seed for sowing. You are never ever, hear me, you will never ever outgive God. He will take care of you. He will take care of you. So do you see what Christ is talking about here? Do y'all see this? Do you feel raked over the coals like I have this week studying this? And see, this goes all the way from the guy that has a lot all the way down to the guy that doesn't have a whole lot. Because all of us have to have an eternal perspective on what we have. All of us need to be giving to, I'll say it, we need to be giving to the church. Because what does the church do? It takes the gospels into our community. It takes the gospel into the rest of our state, our region, into the world. Has Christ made a difference in your life? Has he? Yes. I want to hear it. Has he made a difference in your life? And if he has made a difference in your life, you should give to the efforts of taking it out there into the world. If he has changed you, you should give to the efforts of him, of this church and other organizations taking it out there into the world. You know why you don't hear a lot of sermons in here about giving? We're just doing this because we're going through the Sermon on the Mount. You know why we don't do it in here? You know why we don't badger you with this? Because it cheapens the cross. It cheapens the cross. And if the cross and Christ and what he has done for you, if it has made a difference in your life, it should make a difference when you open up your checkbook and you check the ledger. And so give because he's made a difference in your life. That is all the reason we need. And I'm not saying this so that you give more to the church so it benefits me. I want to see Christ glorified. Are you with me? Yes. And we as a church, we need to have this eternal mindset. Pray with me. Father, I thank you for this morning, for the opportunity that we've had to look at this passage, to see of an eternal perspective on giving, on life. How do we deal with what you have entrusted to us, what you have made us stewards of? God, I pray that you would take these principles, that you would chisel them on the walls of our minds, that we might not forget them. God, I pray that we would be people not just of knowledge after hearing this, but that we would be people of action, that it would be fun watching you as we give away what you have given to us, to watch you continually provide for us and for our needs. God, would you make us a church that always has an eye on heaven? And may we operate with what has been given to us as a people who have the correct perspective, and our eyes are a lamp that lead our way. And so, God, this morning, as we close out our time, as we sing together, God, if you are working on our hearts, I pray that we would do business with you now. God, that we would kneel where we are, that we would come to the altar. God, that we would decide to change, not for the sake of anyone or anything else, but for the sake of the gospel of Jesus Christ and the cross. Would you give us this perspective on our resources? So God, be with us now as we worship you, as we do business with you. It's in the name of Christ I ask these things. Amen.